Hi, everyone.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Good. Okay. I was like, oh, for a second. Okay, so we're here to talk about the Naksa today. Has anyone heard of it already? Know it by another name? Have general knowledge of the event?
Patrick. Mm. So this is a different event from the Nakba. Yeah. Um, Brendan.
I think it's the 7th.
Yes, it's also known, it's most commonly known as the 6-Day War. Yes.
Should we put the
Yeah.
other slide on?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Oh, frogs. I'm sorry, guys. Also, I just want to say that, what? That's the wrong side. Okay. I also do just want to say that I'm not sick, so I'm not going to infect anyone. I just strained my voice, so that's why it's a little froggy right now. So I apologize. I did, yes, at the president. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we sound hoarse, we're healthy, just slightly worn down in the voice. Okay, so yes, the Naksa is different than the Nakba. And over the course of 6 days in 1967, from June 5th to the 10th, Israel seized control over the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza, which was under Egypt's control, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, which were under Jordan's control, and the Golan Heights, which was in Syria. There are different names that are used to define this war. Some are used to convey different interpretations. So Naksa means setback in Arabic, and it refers to the largest loss of land since the Nakba and the Israeli occupation of the entirety of historic Palestine. Also known as the 6-Day War, Israelis saw it as a great success because it basically tripled the amount of land that they owned. And the quote from Khalidi, or from an article that's tagged at the end of this slide, in 1967, Israel absorbed the whole of historical Palestine, as well as additional territory from Egypt and Syria. By the end of the war, Israel had expelled another 300,000 Palestinians from their homes, including 130,000 who were displaced in 1948. So meaning they've been displaced once already, displaced again, and gained territory that was 3.5 times its size.
Yes, the Naksa is the term that Palestinians use to refer to this event, and it's known as the setback again, just because it was the next biggest loss of land and their homeland after the Nakba. Okay, so in order to sort of contextualize what led up to this war, it's important to look at some lead up events. I would say first and foremost, coming out of 1948, the 1948 Nakba, there was this sort of general air of dissatisfaction amongst Israeli citizens and military officials with the amount of land that had been seized in 1948, because they failed to seize the total of what is considered the biblical land of Israel, which also does encompass the West Bank, because those are the ancient lands of Judea and Samaria. So, sort of leading through these events, it's going to show the ways that Israel was sort of agitating the area, and they were being the aggressor in a lot of these events, and also their underlying intentions. So this is important to know going into it. But between 1949 and 1956, Israeli snipers shot and the military killed between 2,000 and 5,000 Palestinian refugees who crossed the border. So they were coming from Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and they were trying to either get back to their homeland to try to find lost loved ones, return to their home, or gather lost possessions. And Israel was trying to enforce that border by killing thousands of people during this time. Then in 1953, we have the massacre in Kibbutz, which is a village in the West Bank, where Israeli forces attacked a small village right on the outer border of the West Bank. And they killed over 70 Palestinians, destroyed 45 homes, a school, and a mosque, and all of those deaths were civilians. The incident that the Israeli government really used to try to justify the assault on Kibbutz was when a Jewish woman and her 2 children were killed by a grenade that was thrown into their house. But despite the UN investigations, Jordanian investigations, and Israeli investigations, they were never able to prove that it was a Palestinian infiltrator that had done it. So it was kind of, on false pretenses. And then going into 1956, the newly elected president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, had nationalized the Suez Canal. We talked about this in the 102 teach-in for those of you who were here, and blocked passage of Israeli ships. So in response, Britain, France, and Israel invaded Egypt in order to try to gain control of the Suez Canal. And then the US threatened to impose sanctions because they felt left out of the plan. They felt like it was done behind their back. So eventually the 3 nations did back down. And many Israeli citizens and military officials saw this as a huge loss. They felt that the Israeli government didn't cause the Arab nations to suffer in a way that would have really deterred them from trying to do any sort of military action or attack on Israel in the future. So Ben-Gurion, the Israeli prime minister at the time, believed that another war would really help secure the borders of Israel by imposing that fear in the region and sort of their dominance as well. Then between the 50s and the 60s, you see the rise of the Fedayeen movement, which is the Palestinian armed resistance groups. So this is sort of another symbol of rising tensions, because as Israel is beginning to attack all of these villages and trying to impose these borders and killing Palestinian refugees, there were like these freedom fighters who were trying to attack Israel as well. So then in the mid 1960s, you see rising tensions as well, where if the Arab states weren't going to do anything, the Fedayeen said that they would do that initiative on behalf. And then in 1964, Israel initiated the National Water Carrier. And I'm sorry, I recognize that this slide says Israel initiates the National Water Carrier of Israel, but don't worry about it. And this is really crucial. So I'm just gonna hop over to another slide really quick, because the constant struggle for the waters of the Jordan River was one of the major causes of the Naksa, or the Six-Day War. And that's because securing a supply of fresh water had been a goal of the early Zionists over time, and then was an explicit policy of the state of Israel later on. I'm sorry, I did it on my computer and not on this computer, so that's my bad. We're figuring it out. And the reason for trying to secure this fresh water supply, I feel like, is pretty obvious. You're in a hot, arid desert region, and this is important for ensuring economic growth and security, and can also be used as a form of control over Palestinians and other neighboring Arab nations. So I figured that this map would be helpful, because you can see how the Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee, goes down along the coast with Jordan and Israel, and then to the Dead Sea. So this doesn't just affect Palestine, this also affects Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Israel. It affects everyone in the region. I'm just gonna get up really quick. So this was essentially the National Water Carrier pipeline, where it was pumping water from the Sea of Galilee down into the center of the country. So this caused a lot of tension with Syria, because that was their main water source, was the Sea of Galilee in the area, and then also with Jordan and Palestinian villages. And this also put further stress on the main water supply, which was already strained by the immigration of over 1 million Jews between 1918 and 1966. And the Palestinian population was also growing and being put into smaller and smaller areas during this time. So you see denser populations in specific regions, but then also the limiting of water at the same time. And this really plays into the larger narrative of Israel using water as a method of control in the region. And this carries over into the present day. But I guess we'll talk about that more later on. We'll get back to that. But just to get back to some lead up events. Oh, I did it again. Sorry. So in 1966, Israel attacked another Palestinian village. This time it was Asamu in the West Bank. And 2 days before this massacre happened, an Israeli border patrol hit a mine, killing 3 soldiers and injuring 6 others. Israel accused the villagers of helping the freedom fighters. And in response, they attacked. So again, this is an unfounded attack. And the Israeli soldiers completely demolished 125 houses, the village's only medical clinic, a school, a workshop, and a mosque. A mosque and 28 houses were damaged. 3 civilians were killed and 96 were wounded. And the United Nations responded by censuring Israel for violating the General Armistice Agreement from 1948. And then coming out of this and sort of leading into the month before the 6-day war, the Egyptian president Nasser had denied Israeli ships passage through the Suez Canal once again. So just sort of heightening those tensions, everything is getting, peak tension is happening. So going into this war, Israel was really playing the victim. They were trying to say that they needed to, that they were this small nation that was at threat from their Arab nations, and that they had to sort of secure their borders. But all of these events show that they were consistently really the aggressor, and also had this underlying theme of trying to get control of more land, more resources, and more power in the region. Okay, sorry, I feel like I talked a lot, Haiku.
No, you did great. Okay. So even today, we have a lot of questions from people saying, why should we care? That's over there. That's an over there problem. It is not an over there problem. The US is heavily involved and has been heavily involved for quite some time. In regards to this specific instance, Israel's foreign minister had told President Johnson that Egypt was going to attack. And as Bonnie just mentioned, they had been putting forth this pretense that they were this victim that needed to defend themselves. Sound familiar? And then when Johnson asked his Secretary of Defense, McNamara, he came back and said 3 separate intelligence groups had looked carefully into the matter, and it was our best judgment that an attack was not imminent. All of our intelligence people are unanimous, Johnson added, that if Egypt were attacked, you will whip the hell out of them. As Washington knew, Israel's military in 1967 was far superior to the militaries of all Arab states combined, as it was in every contest between them. And then General Mir Amit told Secretary of Defense McNamara that he was going to recommend to his own government that Israel launch an attack. He asked the secretary for assurances that the United States would not react negatively. And all that was asked was how long it would be and how many Israeli casualties there would be. No concern for anybody else. And that basically gave Israel the green light to go ahead with their attack because there were no other questions asked. And even though the US knew that there was no threat of attack from any of the other Arab nations, and when this was over, Jordan's ambassador had said to a group of Arab UN officials and diplomats he felt he had been the victim of American duplicity. Arab ambassadors were advised that the United States was mediating with Israel to defuse the crisis and would restrain it from attacking, urging them to counsel restraint to their governments. So telling all their governments, hey, the US is gonna broker some peace here, we're not gonna attack, you know, pull your militaries back. But meanwhile, the Johnson administration had given Israel the go-ahead for its surprise attack just before Egypt's vice president arrived in Washington for negotiations to resolve the crisis. So there's that. Back to Bonnie. Maybe she has better news.
No, I don't. I only have bad news. So then on June 5th, Israel attacked Egypt's air bases in the Sinai Peninsula. And this was sort of seen as a necessary first strike or preemptive attack for Israel, because they were operating that Egypt was going to attack them first, even though just as Haiku said, knew that even if they were going to attack, that their military was superior and that they wouldn't suffer any real consequences from it. So they targeted Egypt's air bases and reportedly disabled about 90% of the Air Force. They also attacked Jordanian and Syrian airfields, which gave Israel air supremacy, or the advantage in the air, which is really crucial when you're fighting in a desert region, which has very little cover aside from buildings. And when you're in an airfield, everything is very flat and open, so it doesn't give you many places to hide. Then on June 6th, Israel takes several Egyptian cities, including Gaza. That includes also Ras El Nakeb and Jebel Libni. And then on June 7th, the UN calls for ceasefire resolutions. The Security Council presented a ceasefire initiative, but Egypt's president turned it down. And they also, East Jerusalem fell to Israel on the same day after 2 days of fighting. They had been fighting for control of the region. And then on June 8th, you see several more Palestinian cities and villages in the West Bank fall to Israel's control. This includes Nablus, Bethlehem, Hebron, Jericho. The IOF on this same day also shelled the two main bridges, the Abdullah and the Hussein bridges that cross the Jordan River and connect the West Bank to Jordan. So that also affected Jordan's ability to get sort of reinforcements into the area, and the West Bank's access to Jordan as well. Then on June 8th, and with this like 6-day war business, there's a lot of stuff happening all at once. So Israel then sinks the USS Liberty. This resulted in the death of 36 US sailors and injured 171 more. And the US sort of accepts this explanation of like mistaken identity that Israel put forth, even though US officials who had intercepted the transcripts from the radio communications of the IOF at the time said that that was not the case. There's very little investigation into this. Haiku, is it your turn now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
And then Israel had begun advancing on the Syrian Golan Heights and captured it on June 9th. The Soviet Union had proposed a third, more urgent ceasefire resolution because the Soviet Union equipped the Egyptian army, and they're also trying to protect Syria from an Israeli march on Damascus. However, the US Ambassador Arthur Goldberg stalled during this UN meeting for several hours, and he stalled several different times, which allowed Israel time to invade Syria. So by Friday, Israel had defeated Egyptian and the Jordanian armies, occupied the Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, West Bank, and Arab East Jerusalem. On June 9th, Israel and Egypt signed a ceasefire, and then 2 days later, Israel and Syria signed a ceasefire agreement.
So then that was like a bunch of word salad. I feel like it was so I thought like a map would be helpful, but you see here in the dark blue, what were the borders of Israel prior to 1967. This is from 1949. And then after the 6-day war, all the light blue is the area that Israel had gained control over. So this includes the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. So again, Haiku said this earlier, but they tripled essentially the amount of land that was under their control. And this is, of course, not the borders that we know Israel by today. So just to go into it a little bit quickly. You see that Israel did return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt bit by bit over time. This was really used as like a bargaining chip where they would return portions of the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for political concessions or some sort of security. The Golan Heights was officially annexed by Israel in 1981, but the international community rejects this basically as they blanket reject this and consider it to be Syrian land that is currently occupied by Israel. Israel did also withdraw from Gaza in 2005, but they are still considered to be an occupied territory because Israel is in control of their air, land, sea, their civilian infrastructure, everything that affects life in Gaza. Is under control of Israel, and they've also been under siege since 2007. And that was with the rise of Hamas as a political force. But this feels really important to say because people try to say now that Gaza is not occupied because Israel did withdraw. But when you have every aspect of your life being affected by another oppressive entity, it's an occupation.
And this is also like the UN has said that they are technically considered to be occupied. So that's not just us saying, well, they control this, so we think. Like this is another international community, large legal bodies saying like, you're still occupying that territory. So the whole argument of self-defense, irrelevant because you're not allowed self-defense against a territory that you occupy. And so in 1967, after the Six-Day War, the effect on Palestinians, Israel ethnically cleansed and destroyed several Palestinian villages, expelling over 10,000. The most famous of the villages were Imwas, Beit Nuba, and Yalu. In Qalqilia and Tulkarem, the Israeli army systematically destroyed Palestinian homes, which means they intentionally and repeatedly did it. So no like, whoops, we were trying really hard to be precise and accidentally, like they did this on purpose. About 12,000 Palestinians were forced out of Qalqilia alone as a means of punishment. And they use that tactic a lot, the whole collective punishment to try to, they'll say they're trying to use that to get Hamas or whatever political party they're currently after to surrender or whatever. We're seeing how that plays out. The majority of the newly displaced Palestinians fled to Jordan. Many crossed through the river and did so on foot with very few belongings, if they had anything at all.
Very similar to the Nakba.
Yes, very similar to the Nakba. We'll get there. The loss triggered the emergence of armed resistance movements whose goal was to take back Palestine by force. So if someone comes into your home, forces you out of it, what is your natural reaction going to probably be? Like, yeah, yes, that. So a central paradox of 1967 is that by defeating the Arabs, Israel resurrected the Palestinians, because at some point between 48 and before this Six-Day War, Palestinians had been kind of fading from prominence in terms of conversation and people trying to rectify the situation. However, now since all of this land had been lost, so many more people had been expelled, they kind of galvanized them again. And so the resistance movements found another win, so to speak. The other effect from this was UN Security Council Resolution 242, which was drafted by British Lord Caradon, but it was basically the views of the United States and Israel. It reflected the weakened position of the Arab states and their Soviet patron after the defeat. SC 242 allowed for the possibility of enlarged Israeli borders to meet the criterion of security as determined by Israel. So any concessions on giving back land or securing borders was based on peace agreements negotiated with Israel, which meant that anything was going to be very slow. And actually, I have a quote in here, if I can find it. Any withdrawals would be both conditional and delayed, given the Arab states' reluctance to engage in direct negotiations with Israel. And based on all that we had said before, you could probably see why they were a little hesitant to negotiate with Israel. There was also a lot of big ambiguity in Security Council 242. They said that like the US, the English version said withdrawal from territories occupied and not withdrawal from the territories occupied. The French version did not have that little loophole, but Israel, of course, chose the English version because it allowed for them to not directly address the territories that they had just taken over. And SC 242 also made no mention of Palestine or Palestinians. So that also kind of helped give them more ability to act as though the Arab states were just being difficult and using like a phantom Palestine problem to not negotiate with them. And then only 2 years later, Golda Meir had even said there was no such thing as Palestinians. They did not exist. And this reinforced the long-held Zionist narrative of a land with no people for a people with no land. But as we're just discussing, there were lots and lots of people in that land.
With strong ties to that land.
With strong ties to that land.
Mm-hmm. So another way that this war affected Palestinians was by access of water. So this war was in part started because of water, and it continues to stifle Palestinians' access to water to this day. So approximately 4 months after Israel seized control of Gaza and the West Bank, they passed Military Order 158, which stated that Palestinians could not construct any new water infrastructure. So this means that they couldn't tap into new water sources. It means that they couldn't make any adjustments or deepen any wells to existing water infrastructure as well without receiving the required permits from Israel, which I think we can all guess were nearly impossible to get, just like building permits from Israel are nearly impossible to get. So they're unable to drill wells, install pumps, deepen existing wells. It also denied access to the Jordan River and the freshwater springs. Israel even controls the collection of rainwater in the region, and it's illegal to collect rainwater because Israel, by their own mandate, controls the water that falls from the sky. They say that they own it, literally. So this affects Palestinians also because the IOF destroys Palestinian rainwater cisterns, which have been used for centuries in the region to ensure that this, again, arid region, that the villagers would have access to water. They also route water away from Palestinian communities and have contaminated Palestinian water supplies. So I'm going to go into some graphics of the West Bank and Gaza that just help sort of illustrate some of these things. So water in the West Bank is being detoured away from those civilians, where Israel continues to control and restrict Palestinian access to water to a level which neither meets the populace's needs or constitutes a fair distribution of those water resources. So Ramallah actually has a larger annual rainfall than London does, and they have similar size access to aquifers, but there's not enough water for the people that live in the West Bank. Why do you think that is? Well, it's because Israel limits Palestinian access to water in 4 main ways. The first is that they appropriate water resources by controlling all main water sources and then deciding the flow of that water, both in amount and direction, where it goes to, who it goes to. They control the supply of water by enforcing an annual military sanctioned water quota for Palestinian communities. They also obstruct the development of water infrastructure using Military Order 158. This, again, denies requests to sink new wells in the most productive aquifers in the West Bank. And they destroy water infrastructure, as we were saying. So they destroy, the military orders the demolition of both wells and cisterns in the West Bank. The result of this is that Palestinians receive approximately 70 liters of water per person per day, and Israelis receive 300. The World Health Organization says that the minimum amount of water necessary for appropriate hydration and sanitation levels is 100 liters per person per day. So this really shows you that if you break it down, there is enough to distribute these resources equally, but they are intentionally denying Palestinians that appropriate level of water to live. And the Israeli state-owned water company does sell water to some Palestinian water utilities, but again, that amount is determined by Israeli authorities. And as a result, there are continuous restrictions, and many Palestinian communities have to buy water off of trucks that bring the water in at an exorbitant price. And in some of the lowest income communities in the West Bank, this can account for half of their monthly income. So using these tactics, Israel has effectively developed its own water infrastructure and network in the West Bank for the use of its own citizens in Israel, but denies it to those who live in the West Bank, where I think it's like 180 communities in the West Bank don't have access to running water, but Israeli citizens get to enjoy lush crops and pools and all sorts of water-based luxuries, yes.
It was a fun little, fun. Getting. Very funny, take a shower. And it was very pointed. So you film yourself taking a shower as a flat space. So we know that we control your water supply. What are you gonna do about it? And it's just how something so mundane. It was something so mundane, so pointed and evil kind of changed my perception a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone in the audience, for those of you on Zoom, just talked about a TikTok where at the beginning of the current genocide, someone in Israel was making a point of how they could take a shower, knowing that they that Israel controls Palestinian water supplies. So then looking at Gaza now, 95% of the water supply in Gaza is contaminated and unfit for human consumption. That's because all the drinking water wells are heavily loaded with salts, chemicals, and other pollutants. 26% of diseases in Gaza are caused by waterborne or water transmitted illnesses. One of the common issues is high nitrate levels in the water that far exceed the WHO recommended levels for safe consumption. And just to list off some of the side effects or symptoms of high nitrate levels, this can lead to fatal blood disorders in infants, causes hair loss, abdominal cramps, irregular heart rate, fatigue, breathing difficulties, and can lead to increased risk of cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. And that's not even the full list. And that is only one pollutant or one contaminant in the water. Israel also doesn't allow for water to be transferred from the West Bank to Gaza. And the West Bank has larger aquifers. And Gaza's only freshwater resource is the coastal aquifer, which is insufficient, one, for the needs of the population. It's also highly polluted and is being increasingly depleted by over-extraction. And it's being contaminated both by sewage and seawater infiltration, which feels kind of important too to note that one tactic that Israel is using, has been using throughout this genocide, is dumping seawater into these like underground tunnels, which is also infiltrating the groundwater and then further contaminating the aquifers, which is going to affect people's supply to drinking water and also water for agriculture for generations to come. Not to mention that because Gaza has been under siege since 2007, they have a limited supply of fuel and electricity because it's controlled by Israel. And there are frequent blackouts which leave people without access to their well pumps because they're inoperable, so they no longer have water. And these long periods of time impede drinking water supply and also sewage treatment, because when there is no electricity, the sewage treatment facilities are not processing. Not to mention that Israel is consistently bombing Gaza, which affects the infrastructure of the sewage treatment facilities, which leads to further spread of water-related diseases. And I just want to say too, all of this information is from 2012. This is from over 11 years before this current genocide started. So when you read reports saying that there is no clean drinking water in Gaza, like, it's not a hyperbole, it's literally a fact. There was almost no clean drinking water in Gaza to begin with. So yeah, the next slide.
Just to add on to Bonnie's point, or I would like to point out just the ingenuity and brilliance of Palestinians. So even just the water alone, having it so restricted, that they're still growing things, and well, before this genocide, but still were able to grow these beautiful crops, and just the ingenuity and creativity and their ability to survive is really just awe-inspiring, considering that's just the water. We're not talking about the constant attacks, the abductions, the losing their family members. Like, it's I just want to point out how incredible they are for enduring, for surviving, for sustaining through the last many decades.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. And also, like, just to point out something too, like, that cisterns had been so important for centuries, for generations, for, you know, the stewards of this land for thousands of years. The systems that they came up with in order to live in this region and be able to grow crops, like you're saying, Israel sort of tries to thwart at every opportunity. And then they continue to find ways to work around because they are the true stewards of this land. They are the true indigenous people of this region.
And I've seen a lot of indigenous people point out that people who are indigenous to land, they care for their land. They will sacrifice themselves to take care of it. They will not destroy it. They won't rip it to pieces. So if you ever look at a situation and wonder who's truly indigenous, look who's caring for the land, not destroying it. And in conclusion, this quote ties in nicely with past and present. Yet the myth prevails. In 1967, a tiny, vulnerable country faced constant existential peril, and it continues to do so. This fiction has served to justify blanket support of Israeli policies, no matter how extreme, and despite its repeated rebuttal, even by authoritative Israeli voices. So there are some Israeli voices who speak the truth, like Gideon Levy. He is an Israeli journalist who spent pretty much his entire career talking about the Israeli occupation and just how wrong it is and what they've been doing to the Palestinians. But you can also see how this ties into the current genocide and how the aggressor paints themselves as the victim and says, we have to defend ourselves or they're going to attack us. We're under constant threat. We have to secure our borders. But when you look at it, it's a population of people who are under siege, locked in, and are using bits and pieces of whatever weaponry to create a defense to try to protect their land and their people.
I learned recently, at the beginning of the onset of it, that apparently Hamas makes their armament from the shrapnel, right? From the what's left of the bombs.
Yeah, whatever's left.
From your rockets. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They, from the scraps of the bombs used to subjugate their people, they use that and with ingenuity a moment ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nothing.
Yep.
Stuff.
For those of you on Zoom, I'm just going to repeat that really quick. Somebody from the audience, the same person from the audience as before, said that Hamas makes their bombs by using the unexploded bombs that Israel dropped on Gaza. Can I pass this around so that everyone on Zoom can feel like they're part of the conversation? And then we can, yeah, was that okay?
Yeah, I just was, I mean, we know the obvious cruelty that we've seen, you know, even in just that week of 1967, where they're trying to expand their borders, trying to get all the land, trying to get all their resources, trying to get all the water. But then there's that additional sickness on top of it. Yes, we have all the water, we have all the land, and we still see what you have, and we're gonna fuck with you.
You can't have it. We don't want you to have it. Yeah,
Right.
we want it all.
I wanted to say more about water. As climate change accelerates, in particular in the Islamic world / Middle East and the global South in general, water has been a not only a consistent issue, it's been consistent point of conflict. Like for example, the Syrian civil war. It began with protests, and those protests began after I think a young, like a teenager, had spray painted some some government facility, and he was arrested and tortured, as the Syrian government was wont to do. And that actually started as a conflict over water. The Syrian government was denying access of water to a particular community. So in the first place, the lack of water is a source of destabilization in the Middle East. And to tie it back to Gaza, in addition to the sewage treatment plants, a water desalination plant, which drew water from the Mediterranean Sea and desalinated it, was also destroyed at the start of this genocide. And desalination plants are at the moment fairly crucial for getting fresh water to a lot of people in the Middle East. It's pretty crucial in Saudi Arabia, and it's pretty crucial in Israel. There's a video of Netanyahu like drinking a glass of fresh water, and that was from a new Israeli desalination plant that opened not long ago, which just basically refills the Sea of Galilee, because at the moment the Sea of Galilee is like losing a ton of water from evaporation, and that problem is accelerating because of climate change.
I just say something that speaks to this entire lesson. I grew up conservative evangelical, went to a very evangelical school, and I remember learning about the 6-Day War, as I was told it was called, from both my parents and from the school that I went to. And the narrative that I got was that this was evidence that God ordained Israel to exist as a state. The story was, y'all are laughing, but
Oh, yeah,
but
it is pretty funny.
no, it gets worse.
Oh, yeah.
I was told that Israel beat back its enemies with broomsticks painted black to look like guns, that they were the victims, they were the ones being aggressed upon. And their victories in those 6 days were proof that God loved them and blessed them, and that we should support them in everything we do as a country. Now, to bring that into the present,
Not that they had the most bombs or the most guns.
No.
Or the most anything.
that was
No, it
completely
all God.
that was
yeah.
all absent from this narrative. And that same narrative is present today in the same people that wrote Project 2025, that support appeals to heaven, that
God loves white people.
yes, this is the same thing that's still happening today. I am grateful that I am not a part of that community anymore, but they are getting louder, they are getting more powerful. And that's what we need to focus on as a group, being here in the United States. This isn't just over there. This is right in our backyard.
Broomstick?
Y'all laugh, and I understand. It does sound really funny. But yeah.
Yeah, the victim narrative is pervasive.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, you see it yet today, right? Like disproportionate aggression. You see it in all the events leading up to the to the Naksa, right? With, you know, a mother and her 2 children are killed by a grenade. They decide who it was with no proof, and then they attack an entire village and kill 3 people and injure 100 more and destroy everyone's home. It's like they're a toddler having the most destructive, murderous tantrum over and over and over again for the past 100 years. John, Patrick, could you pass it back to John?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that grenade attack that you mentioned in the 50s that you just alluded to again, the reprisal was led by Ariel Sharon, who would go on to be the architect of their invasion of Lebanon and their siege on Beirut, and prime minister, and was Benjamin Netanyahu's chief rival for control of the Likud party. And I just say all of this to say, you know, the militarism runs deep.
Does anyone else want to say anything or have any questions? We finished really early. Oh, Amy has to talk now. Wait, Tom, Tom has a question. Can you
Oh.
pass that to Tom,
Yeah.
please?
You mentioned how like the Sinai Peninsula was returned, right? And you said it was like over a period of time, but like, were there Israeli residents there? Like, what did that look like actually returning that land, dude? I'm just curious if you know anything about that. Nope.
John?
I didn't.
Oh, like what if when they returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, what were there Israeli residents, and two, what did that look like?
The only thing that I can say is that I don't know if there were Israeli residents, but my understanding is that the Sinai Peninsula was really difficult for them to continue to control over time, because it was like sort of, they didn't have the infrastructure there necessarily, and it was like a large annexation. So it kind of made more sense to use it as like bargaining chips over time to get other political concessions from Egypt. Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding. I only say John because I assume he knows something that I don't.
No,
He knows lots of things I don't know.
I think that was right, and I would just emphasize that they didn't move settlers in, like Bonnie was saying. You know, they couldn't really hold it. Egypt was also fighting a war in Yemen, kind of against Saudi Arabia at the time, and you know, their focus was like bifurcated this whole conflict, and you know, it was just a negotiating tool for Israel.
I think they just took it because they could.
Yes,
Basically.
yeah.
Brian had a question
Oh, he's over there.
in the back.
A real quick comment. I think it does get to a broader point where a big contradiction that Israel faces is that Zionism is inherently expansionist, but the more it expands, the less stable it becomes. So they take Sinai, they take Golan Heights, you know, the more they branch out, the more it inspires people in the surrounding areas to also resist. And that's where you find Israel running into problems. I was told growing up about the so-called Six-Day War that it's part of a broader pattern of, you know, Israel's never lost a war because if it did, it would disappear. Israel got their ass handed to them by Lebanon a few years ago, and they will continue to do so as they get more and more backed into a corner and unstable. So I think it shows part of that like broader trend of they're unable to just stop and be satisfied with what they've already captured because it has to keep growing or it fails.
I want to say, again on the Sinai Peninsula. The Sinai Peninsula is like desert. Historical Palestine and the occupied Palestinian territories. You think that's a desert? No, the Sinai Peninsula, like nothing grows. Nothing grows. You can't have any kind of agriculture there, which is why barely anyone lives there. If anyone lives there, they're not an agricultural people. Which, to tie it into Gaza, there was talk of pushing the Gazans, from Israeli officials, of pushing Gazans into the Sinai Peninsula, which would be very bad because, again, nothing grows. Yeah.
Something that I'm realizing that I forgot to show. Brenda made me think of it. Can you go back to slide 12, please, Amy? Just talking about desert and water and all of this stuff. It just felt important to illustrate this, but do you see how much the desert region follows right along the border of the West Bank?
I just forgot to point that out. It just feels pretty clear. Sorry. Anyway, that was kind of an aside, but
Yeah, Khalidi talks about this, and I think Elon Papa also talks about this in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Is that part of the reason Palestine is such a I don't know, a land that's been fought over so much is because of how fertile it is. The Prior to 1948 and even now, Palestine has a extremely I don't know, fruitful olive industry, citrus industry, fig industry, and those strawberry industry, pomegranates.
well, it's literally Mesopotamia. It's
Yeah.
the Fertile
Part of it,
Crescent.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the Fertile Crescent. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Fertile Crescent is in Iraq, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's between the Tigris and the
Just
Euphrates
kidding.
rivers, which are in Iraq.
Let's just say that I ended up in Mesopotamia.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's like considered part of Mesopotamia, but the more important point is that Palestine is an exceptionally fertile land, and that makes it very valuable land.
Yep. Is it Amy's turn now? You want a microphone, Amy?
First of all, thank you, Haiku and Bonnie, for leading this. Really appreciate you. I'm happy. Please check out these sources. The bottom two are very recent and were created in collaboration with Este, and those are two sources that we're trying to get into local public schools. So check them out. The bottom one is an actual course that like walks through the Palestinian question. And it's really like, I wish I had this kind of course when I was in school. It's really well done. So those are just two resources as we get closer to the school year that HPC will be trying to get more of this into our local schools. So if you want to talk to your teacher friends and pass it along. Do you mind going to the next slide? And then, you know, I'm always here with my books. The Venmo code is here if you'd like to. These teach-ins are a lot of labor of love. And so we'd like to also give back to the local community. So I have both the books this time. Usually I only have the one. We are trying to get these books into Layers of Black History. Corey takes them and distributes them at local fairs or wherever he's vending or schools. And so we're trying to help diversify and include Palestinian voices in the books that he distributes. So we Are Palestinians. And then this book is really good. Zayn and Mima Stand for Palestine. This is really current. I actually read it to my own children to explain what's happening. But we'd like to get these more of these out into the local community. So if you are able to, like $5 or $10, and we have a very cute little sticker that Bonnie made that you can write your first name on, and it'll go in the book, and it's really cool. And Corey from Layers of Black History is really appreciative of these books. So if you're able to, feel free to stop by, scan the Venmo code, let me know you need a sticker to sign, and yeah. And our next teach-in will be 105, which I think is the Intifadas. Is that you, John? Is it the first and second Intifada?
He's so excited.
You're making me feel uncertain. That's right. Okay. Same place, same time in 2 weeks. And we'll have the Zoom option as we always do. But thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.